Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. President just arrived and we can start. My name is Pavel Demes and I will be moderating this panel. And I'm truly privileged that I was assigned by organizers to do this, although I think that the title would suggest that best moderator would be priest or theologian, because mapping spirit of Europe is something more metaphysical than classical foreign policy debate, but I will do my best. We would like to make this panel as interactive as possible, since we have in hall many people who are from Central Europe, who have enormous expertise in this topic. So we will, after introduction of panelists, and I will ask each of them one or two questions, open it to all of you to make your comments or give questions to our distinguished panelists. So let me introduce them in alphabetic order, but we will not then go necessarily in alphabetic order, because probably each panelist will bring some new twist on the topic, and based on that I will be asking individual panelists to give the floor. The only privileged person is Mr. Alejandro Negrín, who is from Mexico. He's Director General for Europe. I already agreed with him that since he's not really from Central Europe, because Central Europe is growing and growing and growing, but Mexico is not there yet, that he will have privilege to make his statement comments based on what he hears. So we have Mr. Petr Drulák, First Deputy Prime Minister from Ministry of Third Deputy Foreign Minister. Slovak Foreign Minister is Deputy Prime Minister, so he's Deputy Foreign Minister from Czech Republic. We have Professor Münz from Austria, who is co-author of the Central Europe report, well-known specialist on our region, who was also a member of Reflection Group on Central Europe. His Excellency Tibor Navracsics, Minister of Foreign Affairs from Hungary. All of us already had privilege to hear yesterday at the opening panel. And then Dr. Danilo Türk, former President of Republic of Slovenia. And last but not least, Karla Wursterová from Bratislava, Slovakia, country where I'm coming from. And Karla is Executive Director of International Visegrad Fund. So with all of these, I think that I will just make framing comments. 10 years ago, there was Big Bang EU enlargement. Visegrad, 4 countries, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, plus 3 Baltic states, joined the European Union. All of us believed that now on both on individual country level, on regional level, and on EU level, we will be just growing to prosperity and security. But many things evolved quite differently. There are all kinds of bumps on the road which are related not only on external environment, eastern or southern neighborhood of European Union, but also there are rather unexpected trends within our individual countries in new member states or Central European countries which joined European Union 10 years ago. Of course, later Croatia joined, Bulgaria, Romania. I think that one of the biggest and unexpected challenge for Central Europe definitely is current Ukrainian Russian crisis, which is keeping all of us busy after we thought that we are out of woods, overcoming some problematic economic evolution within European Union. And last but not least, also I would like to bring during this discussion topic of transatlantic relations, because also frictions between Europe and United States is something which occurred in last 10 years and particularly in last 2 years in most unexpected way. So the plan for this morning until 12:30 is to map where are we now as Central Europe, what are some key trends and dilemmas which Central Europe is dealing with. And I think that as organizers put it, we do not want to have speeches by panelists or speeches from floor, but rather open, frank, and interactive debate. I would like to ask first Professor Drulák, who is not only Deputy Foreign Minister, but also theoretician of international relations and teacher, if you would help us to understand significance of Central Europe today within European architecture. Is Central Europe, as it is, contributing to well-being of European Union, or it is part of the problem?
Thank you for this difficult question. I'm really very happy to be here. At some point, actually, you made an interesting remark in which you said that there is something metaphysical about discussion about the Central Europe. And I can confirm this, because a few years ago, I co-edited with my good Slovenian friend, Professor Zlatko Šabić, who is also among us, a book on Central Europe in international politics. And we tried to define Central Europe, and we came with so many definitions. It's really difficult to define, and I do not want to define it now. But just I want to say that you ask me to give a concrete political response to a metaphysical question, which is not really easy. So, because Central Europe, when we discuss about it, we can make it very specific, very concrete in terms that we say it's the place. We can have a geographical definition. Or we can have a cultural definition saying that this is the state of the mind. Both is possible. Now, if we want to give a political expression to this phenomenon, whether we see Central Europe as a place or whether we see it as a state of mind, we have to now translate it into politics. And I think that we can benefit from the main theme of the Bled Forum of this year, which is trust. And trust is very important, especially in international politics. Trust is a very rare currency, because states usually do not trust each other. That's one of the definitions of international politics. That's something which is the realm of mistrust. And where I see an important contribution of Central Europe, namely of Visegrad cooperation, is that it has been able to create a network of trust. That's very important. These four countries, they do not always agree on everything. There are many internal divergences between them. That's part of the job, and that has always been so. But because they are able to trust each other to quite a significant degree, they are able to overcome these differences in a productive manner. So in this respect, Central Europe is one of the islands of trust. I don't say it's the only island. There are many other islands of trust in the European Union. And our goal should be to create the network of trust inside the EU as such. And we know how difficult it is, especially with the financial crisis, how actually rare, again, trust became. Because the European responses, these national responses, have been very much shaped by a complete lack of trust. So in this respect, I see a positive contribution of a part of Central Europe, because I talk about Visegrad cooperation, Visegrad 4, and I would not like to say that Visegrad 4 is the same as Central Europe. Central Europe is a broader term, and I hope we will come to this in the discussion. But the main contribution for me is the network of trust in between these four countries, which can then be linked with the wider networks of trust inside the European Union.
Excellent. Minister Navracsics, you yesterday also highlighted during opening plenary Visegrad Quartet as an example of regional cooperation when there was a question about regional leadership. And, but in your statements, Visegrad was rather in contradiction with not so well-functioning European Union. What should EU leadership learn from Visegrad leadership to do better according to your Hungarian point of view?
There are two divergent models because the European Union and the Visegrad 4 countries have ambitions with different purposes. The EU's ambition is to develop an ever closer union. What does it mean? Nobody knows, but there is a purpose consolidated in the treaty that the EU must approach an ever closer union, while the Visegrad 4 group is funded on a common heritage, or a more or less common heritage. That's the Central European, Austro-Hungarian heritage of the culture, way of thinking, methods of institution building, which makes those countries in the Visegrad 4 countries more or less similar to each other. But the Visegrad 4 cooperation has no the ambition to build up a super state, or even it's not the aim of a federation. Is it good or bad? That could be an interesting question. It's the question that is it possible to make or remake a common statehood or a common community among the Central European countries, or is just an intergovernmental cooperation? But I think the Visegrad 4 cooperation has more modest ambitions than the EU, and that could be one lesson which can be learned for the EU leaders. If you want to build up a state at European level, you have to secure the basic elements of a state, traditions, possibly the language, some kind of common heritage, institutions, and legitimacy, popular legitimacy.
Are you happy that one of the member states, namely Poland, delivered European Council President in the name Donald Tusk? Is it good for Visegrad or not so good? Because Poland has slightly different attitudes towards EU probably than Hungary.
It's a brilliant one, I think. It's a huge chance for Central Europe. And of course, Poland has some kind of different opinions in certain issues than, for instance, Hungary or Slovakia or the Czech Republic, because we have slightly different demographical position, geopolitical position. For instance, Hungary is a landlocked country, while Poland is open to the north. We are surrounded more or less friends, while Poland has painful experiences in German-Russian neighborhood. So there are a lot of factors which can amend a country's strategy in the Visegrad cooperation. But the Visegrad cooperation is not a paradise in earth. I think it must be a mechanism for conflict settlement, conflict resolution, and cooperation via institutional cooperation of the countries.
Excellent. Now I would like to ask President Türk, you are not Visegrad member, but there is also another Visegrad in Bosnia. Can you imagine that there could be something like Southern Visegrad group, where Slovenia, together with Visegrad 4, would assist Western Balkans to learn how to create informal grouping, but grouping which, as Minister Navracsics says, has shared history, geography, that we could help Western Balkans somehow to use this model of cooperation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator. You are inviting optimistic spirit in this discussion. Actually, when you started, you said something optimistic. You said that talk about the spirit of Central Europe invites a kind of a theological thought. And this is progress. I remember the time in 1980s when one of the leading thinkers in this area, the Austrian writer of Slovenian origin, Petr, famously wrote that Mitteleuropa is a concept from meteorology, that it's only a meteorological area where one observes the meteorological phenomena, and beyond that it doesn't have any further existence. Now that was 30 years ago. Now you're talking about theological dimensions, and of course when talking about the spirit of Central Europe, one has to really ask deep questions about whether a certain cultural commonality exists, what it is, how does it lend itself to political articulation. And again, in asking me the question about further expansion of Visegrad, of course you convey also an optimistic thought. And I believe that expansion is a natural way to go in terms of political articulation of Central Europe. And I would like to approach it from the perspective of Slovenia as a new nation state. You see, Slovenia is in the process of articulation of its national interest. And this is not a process which can be done quickly. This is not something that can be done in an academic fashion. It comes as a result of political experience. And we have seen in our political experience that, in fact, Slovenia has to develop its own political profile in 3 dimensions: the Balkan, Mediterranean, and Central Europe. And we have to work in all these 3 directions, and Central Europe means also Alpine space, as well as Pannonian space, as well as the direction towards the Baltic. The ideal would be, of course, a kind of a political articulation in the space between the Baltic and the Adriatic, from one sea to another sea, od morza do morza, as the Polish friends are telling us, of course, in a different, new, modern expression. Now, having said that, I mean, these are the fundamentals that I can refer to, trying to answer your question. And finally, on a more practical point, I think that we have done quite a bit of progress. Slovenia has found its common interest with Visegrad countries in some areas, some related to the EU, others not. I mean, the whole Danubian strategy would one way or another come up anyway. Danube is something that links us in this space. Then, on the other hand, the question of cohesion policies and cohesion funds in the European Union is certainly something objective for all of us. And the more we cooperate in that regard, the better for each of us. So we have found certain very practical, very specific expressions of national interest which binds us already. Whether this goes further, it's a question of time rather than anything else, because I believe that the way to promote the political articulation of Central Europe is going through the expansion of Visegrad Group. It may include, I think I would be very happy to see it including Slovenia, Croatia, and then let's see how the situation matures and who else joins. Because I do not consider Visegrad Group as a kind of an exclusive, regionally defined club, but rather as a political articulation of a need which is shared by many. The time at which others can join depends, and I think the future is in the expansion.
Thanks. I will turn now to Karla Wursterová. Karla, you are heading the only institution of Visegrad Group, because Visegrad is informal grouping, but created one entity, which is called International Visegrad Fund, through which projects which are bringing Visegrad 4 countries closer, to help them to understand each other, cooperate, but also this formula Visegrad Plus, when we see not only neighboring countries, but recently there was meeting Visegrad plus South Korea. So I think that it seems that only sky is the limit for Visegrad. Moreover, Slovakia is having now presidency, rotating presidency within Visegrad. So if you could comment a little bit on what are the key issues for presidency, it means how Visegrad is viewing its purpose today. And secondly, if you could make some comments on the strategy of Visegrad Plus, what does it mean for you?
Thank you, Paul. First of all, I'm really proud that for the very first time, the International Visegrad Fund is a sponsor of the Blessed Strategic Forum, and I'm really delighted. Speaking about the presidency program, the competencies, priorities of the Visegrad Group are based on, or are in the competency of the presidency country. From July, the Slovak government started, or took over, this task after the very successful presidency, Hungarian presidency. And probably I can mention 3 principles of the Visegrad Group, and that is continuity, coordination, and cooperation. Speaking about continuity, there are several priorities and strategic goals which were laid down by the previous presidency countries, Hungary or Poland. And just mention energy security or infrastructure. We know that missing transportation is a huge problem still in the Visegrad region, but also, for example, to oversee the preparation of the V4 battle group or other issues. Of course, V4 countries will continue in the coordination of the foreign and security policy, common foreign and security policy. The leitmotif of the Slovak presidency is dynamic Visegrad. It means that we will focus on the competitiveness, internal cohesion of the region, what is the most important. And we will pay, or the Slovak presidency will pay specific attention to economic growth by pro-growth measures, but also including digital agenda or taxation. So these are really very concrete initiatives. Speaking about our following policy priorities, because approximately 80% of the activities of the Visegrad Group is focusing on the internal cohesion. However, we are supporting also our foreign policy priorities, and we are supporting mainly two regions, the region of Eastern Partnership and Western Balkans. We have several pillars. First of all, we will provide political assistance, but also project-based help, which will be tailor-made. Therefore, there are several political visits and consultations, and not only in the capitals of these countries, but also in the region. So we really would like to have a tailor-made policy. Secondly, what is very important, that is the mobility of young people and researchers, and I'm really happy that after the summit of the V4 prime ministers in Budapest, where they announced that they would like to intensify the dialogue with Ukraine, we immediately doubled the number of scholarships, we supported several projects, and we introduced a new instrument that is a civil servants mobility program, which is really missing the capacity building in the public administration in countries as Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine will be one of the main priorities, but we wouldn't like to forget about the situation in Georgia and Moldova, so we will also support those activities which will lead to the effective implementation of the association agreement and DCFTA. And finally, not to forget about human rights and capacity building of NGOs and civil society organizations in Belarus, but also in Armenia and Azerbaijan. We are in Slovenia, and I'm really happy that yesterday the President of the National Assembly mentioned that Slovenia can serve as a bridge or promoter between the regions of Central Europe and Southeastern Europe. So there I really see a big space for mutual cooperation. And now we are working and we are helping to our partners from the Western Balkans region to establish a regionally owned fund on the model of the International Visegrad Fund. And I think that Slovenia can play also a crucial role in this regard. And very briefly mentioning the format V4+. Yes, there are several possibilities. We started 3 years ago an effective and successful cooperation with countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, by supporting programs and initiatives in Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia. And for example, today we enlarged the scope of this cooperation with the Republic of Korea, and I'm really happy that the action was very fast and rapid after the ministerial meeting. It was in July, and already in August we received a decision from the Republic of Korea that they are going to support a big number of projects together with the International Visegrad Fund in Western Balkans. So the sky is the limit, as you mentioned, and I'm really happy that, for example, in September we will sign a memorandum of understanding with Japan on scientific cooperation. So that is not only about foreign policy priorities, but also about very concrete initiatives which can lead to the economic growth and the support of the internal cohesion of the region.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Professor Rainer Münz, who is from Austria and who is leading expert on our region, but since he's not from V4, he can be also probably more reflective and critical, because this Visegrad positivism probably today may go through some tests. I remember during May Globsec conference in Bratislava, there was panel of 4 prime ministers, and after which, so there was Donald Tusk, Viktor Orbán, Robert Fico, and Prime Minister Sobotka, and they made their statements, and from the audience they were almost grilled by questions related to attitudes of individual Visegrad member states towards Ukraine-Russia conflict, towards using more money for military issues of sanctions when they differ and so on. And once that panel was over, then they went in front of journalists and answered some questions. So many observers from the audience, but also journalists, had this feeling that this is not V4, but V1. Poland remaining as Visegrad, and rest of the 3 countries somehow having different attitude. How do you see further evolution of Visegrad for under influence of these tests, which we see now vis-à-vis Russia, and also some dividing lines within European Union itself when it comes to dealing with this tough issue? Surely I would be more than happy if we would have Polish participant. I was introduced to Polish ambassador. He may have some comments, or if there are some other Polish participants as well. But if you could look at, from your perspective as an expert studying for years this region, how do you see future of V4 under the stress what we are in now?
First of all, let me say that we have put our insights into a small report which is available over there. A group of 10 people, including Milan Nič, who is sitting here, has put these ideas together. And the idea was a stock-taking exercise on one side, looking back on what has been achieved over the last 10 years and how would the future look like. Now, the future is more uncertain than when we published it, because we did not foresee a full-fledged crisis between Ukraine and Russia when we drafted the report in the winter. But the achievement is clear. This was economically the fastest growing part of Europe, something like a growth engine that has managed to, say, come from 50% of the EU average to 75%. And the more difficult task is to get from 75 to 100 or beyond, because when you look at investors' conferences, not political one, but investors' conferences, the sales point would be, we have a well-trained workforce, but our wages are pretty low compared to Western standards. Now, you cannot pay low wages and achieve 100% of GDP per capita in Europe, because you need the wages of the people to buy something, but you can also not increase the wages when you're not becoming more productive, because you would just lose your market shares. This is the problem that Greece and Spain and Portugal had. They were just increasing the wages and borrowing money, but not becoming more productive to the same extent. Now the question is, how do you become more productive? This is the economic side of the answer to what you were asking is, you need to invest in production that is at the higher end of the value chain so that you can ask higher prices for your goods, a premium. So become a premium destination for tourism, yeah? So Blade would have the potential, but still the prices are low compared to other parts of Europe. So getting there is a step. Producing premium cars is something that Bratislava has already achieved. I mean, or Audi cars are produced in Hungary, Porsche cars are produced in Bratislava, Volkswagen is producing in Mladá Boleslav, and they're producing premium cars. But these, for the moment, are islands of excellence that needs to grow together so that you can create not only islands but also countries and clusters of excellence. And this is not a given, doesn't go by itself, but it needs an additional effort. And I think that's the common challenge that the Visegrad countries are having, plus Slovenia and Croatia, is to get from 75 to 100. As I said, it's not a given. You need to go there. Now, the advantage of the Visegrad group is that it's, besides Scandinavia, the only functioning regional grouping within the European Union. Yes, there is a permanent allegiance between Cyprus and Greece, and there is some coordination at times between a few other countries, and there's used to be the axis between Germany and France propelling the whole thing. But the Visegrad countries were among the very few initiatives where the prime ministers or the ministers were at least telling each other what their positions are ahead of council meetings, where you had the impression that there was some coordination, and the voting on the next morning would not come as a surprise to the other three partners each way. So that's something that can be leveraged, because in a EU 28 or maybe 29 or 30 tomorrow, if you have a block of a couple of countries that are going into the same direction, you can, how you say, punch above your weight. In particular because you have a big country, Poland, that is respected also by the other big countries like France or Germany or the UK, and you have a disproportionate voting power in smaller countries that are given an overproportional weight. The smaller you are, proportionally the more weight you have, but it doesn't help you because you're so small. But if a few smaller countries and the big one are teaming up, you can really achieve something within the European Union when it comes to allocation, when it comes to general direction of policy making. And we are at such a crossroads because we are not sure whether we should become more serious with confronting Russia or not. And here I think if the Visegrad countries would have a common view on that, being more exposed to the threat than, say, Spain or Portugal, it would make a difference. Now, there's this big if the four countries can come to common solutions and that go beyond, say, having a common fund or having a common dinner or breakfast before the council meeting. But it's possible, and Scandinavia has shown that you can achieve something when you work together. Scandinavia has anticipated lots of, or the Benelux countries have anticipated lots of elements of European integration before it became part of an EU common policy and the legal pillar within the European Union. And so there is the possibility to go ahead together. Like the common procurement in the defense area is one of these examples where the Visegrad countries are ahead of many other European countries who only do it by themselves.
Great, thanks. Now I would like to ask a second round of questions, and we'll open it to the audience. Mr. Drulák, this week our leaders will meet at NATO summit where security will be discussed. How do you see cooperation among Visegrad 4 or plus other Central European countries when it comes to security architecture? Is there something unexpected going to happen at NATO summit? Will Central European states which are members of NATO be different than all the member states?
Well, all kinds of unexpected things come from Russia today. Well, the question is to what extent can they be unexpected? But this is actually how the game is defined. Unfortunately, these days, that we really follow what's going on in the eastern and southern Ukraine. But you asked about the security cooperation, and I think in this particular area we have actually, or the Visegrad countries, have a very ambitious project of the battle group, which is not so much the NATO stuff, it's more the EU stuff. And I think this will be an important contribution to the European security experience. I would not say architecture, because these battle groups projects are very flexible, they are just temporary, but it's important to cultivate EU security experience. And in this respect, Visegrad countries actually contribute by developing the battle group project. But we also have a very actually rich bilateral security cooperations with non-Visegrad countries. We have just made the inventory of these security ties, and surprisingly, they also cut across the alliance borders. So we do have, our Czech Republic has quite a reasonable and vivid cooperation in security matters with Austria, which is not the NATO country, is a neutral country. But we can see that we have this kind of cooperation in security, not only within the EU or within the NATO, but also at the bilateral level. This brings me, to this idea of the future of Central European cooperation, because it seems to me that there is almost consensus that there is some discrepancy between the fact that the only political organization of Central European spirit today is Visegrad, and the fact that Central Europe is somehow larger than Visegrad. And the question is, what is the ideal solution, or what the solution would be? From time to time, it's mentioned that Visegrad could enlarge. I think it's a discussion, it's the option which is worth of discussion, but it will face many obstacles, because that would be really a huge enlargement. I think when we talk about this, we talk actually about enlargement by at least 3 countries, and the question is whether the current setup of Visegrad would survive that. That's something which many people in Visegrad countries, that's the fear which many people in Visegrad countries raise, which does not mean that we should simply say Central Europe is the Visegrad, full stop. But we should think actually about the formats of Central European cooperation next to Visegrad, which would complement with Visegrad, and which can partly overlap with Visegrad countries. And that would be probably the way how to have both Visegrad as it is and new formats which would give actually a political expression to Central European spirit.
Minister Navracsics, do you expect upcoming NATO summit to be uniting or dividing Visegrad member states after they come back from Wales? Will they be more cohesive or more divided?
I think from the point of view of NATO cooperation, there is no division among the V4 countries. There is an ongoing debate about the tools or instruments of confronting the Russian aspirations. If economic sanctions are the most efficient ways of punishing Russia, or can we preclude the exposure of that whole crisis by economic sanctions? But if you talk about military cooperation and NATO cooperation, I think all the V4 countries are loyal allies inside the NATO. So there will be no surprise, I think, in the V4 cooperation.
Mr. Negrín, you heard all kinds of good things about Visegrad, about some concerns, differences, that Central Europe is not only Visegrad, but this is broader space, which also President Türk enlarged, showed us how and where geography goes. Seeing it from Mexico, and you are dealing as Director General with Europe as such, what are some distinctive features of this region, what you see, and probably if you could tell us a little bit how and why for Mexico this region is something what you would probably see also as distinct?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, we are here for recognize the importance of Central Europe, for trying to learn more about the region, for trying to obtain specific elements for having specific policies to this region. I think that my two initial conclusions, one is related with the title of this meeting. If we want to create trust, we need to know better. But the other is that has relation with this exercise of self-recognizing yourselves as a region. If you do that, it's easier for the others, for the outsiders, that can recognize you as a region, I think. So we respect the other part of the question. I think that there are 4 or 5 reasons that explains the interest of Mexico in this region. Of course, one is the purpose of the Slovakian presidents of the Visegrad group in having more contact with emerging economies. And of course, Mexico is one of the most important emerging economies in the world. We are the 14th largest economy in the world. And of course, we are a very globalized economy with 45 free trade agreements, including NAFTA, including with Japan, and of course, including with EU. And we think that there is a huge platform for create the relation. Of course, in our analysis, Central Europe is part of our relation with the European Union, basically. Now, Mexico is in a process after, I'd say, 15 years of having a specific juridical structure for the relation with the European Union, including a free trade agreement. We are now beginning a process for reformulating this structure. So in the analysis, in the evaluation that we have, that we made, we found that our relation with Central Europe is not more than 5 or 6% of the relation that we have with the European Union. So something is happening that it means that we need new tools for explore new avenues with the countries of the region. And of course, Mexico is a huge manufacturer country in many sectors. Probably is not well known, but we are very strong in the aerospace industry, in the cars industry. We are the first exporter of flat screens, TV screens, and so on and so forth. So even if Mexico is, as all the countries, a country that has many challenges, we are now with the intention of establishing a new kind of relations with the world, and then we see that there is the space for doing something with your sub-region. So that's why we really appreciate this opportunity.
And while you are here in Bled and observing discussions, meeting people, do you think that spirit of Mexico is compatible with spirit of Central Europe?
Well, I'd say that in general terms, the basic values that you have in Europe are shared by Mexico. including of course, democracy, including the promotion and protection of human rights, and including that this is one of the principal purposes of the international policy of Mexico, having a position as a global actor in a very responsible way. So we think that basically the structure of values, if you can see it like that, is completely shared.
Excellent. Karla, could Mexico qualify to be Visegrad Plus member? Are there some plans to start Visegrad plus Mexico dialogue?
I think we yesterday had a talk with the Slovak ambassador here in Slovenia. The former Prime Minister Durinda mentions that 4 is a beautiful number. And I can agree that we have an excellent cooperation in this format of P4 countries. However, and you posed the question previously, how do I see the format P4 Plus? I think that it is really an excellent instrument. And as I already mentioned, we are receiving several initiatives from all over the world, from Europe, but also from Asia, Latin America. Of course, we are open to all initiatives, but we need internal debate. It means that we have to evaluate all the added values, possible risks, the impact on the Visegrad region. So I really appreciate that there are regular visits of our ministers, but also political directors, and that it will happen in the end of September in Mexico City. And after the outcomes of this visit, we can evaluate and we can analyze what we can do together, but I'm sure that there is space for cooperation.
Great. President Türk, in the afternoon there will be a big panel on future of the Balkans. It will be huge, discussing apparently some key dilemmas, issues, and so on. From Slovenian, Croatian, Visegrad, Central European countries, what should we do better in order to help other Western Balkan countries to progress on their transition and on their integration agenda? Because it seems that since Croatia joined, probably it will take some time since we'll see another new member of EU, but definitely all of us need to work hard to complete European integration and bring in these countries. What are some of the key practical issues which we should do, could do on political, economic, security and other fields to help remaining Balkan countries to join the club?
Well, this is really a question for the next panel, and probably don't expect me to explain things in any great detail, which is something that the panelists in the afternoon will do. Now, of course, to your question, I would say this. Now that Croatia has become a member of the European Union, the remaining candidates in the area of Western Balkans, each of them faces a kind of a special political problem. We don't have to describe them, they are well known to all of us. So each of them is problematic in one way or another at the political level. And of course, one of the important priorities would be to manage these processes towards European Union in a way which would help solving the political problems within Bosnia and Herzegovina, between Serbia and Kosovo, within or with Macedonia and so on. So that's a political thing, and I'm afraid that the Visegrad Group cannot do very much except in a catalytic sense. I mean, this kind of understanding should be promoted within the European Union and elsewhere. And if that is done, that would be a small political contribution. Now, on a more practical level, there will be new projects in the area of economic cooperation, trade, energy, and so on. And I believe that there will be specific spaces for investment from countries from Central Europe. And that, of course, is a very wide array of possible cooperation where I think specialists, businesses have to be involved. Now, that is basically the two-pronged approach that I would propose. But I think that the discussion at this panel has opened a very interesting aspect which I think Central Europeans have to think about. And that is that that the entire Central European space, not only Visegrad, not only the members of the EU, are becoming more interesting for the world at large. And that's not surprising because we live in a globalizing world. We have heard from Mexico about the interest. It always starts with the fact that there is a deficit, that, for example, a very small proportion of European cooperation of non-European major powers is devoted to Central Europe, and things have to be changed. That is the case with Mexico, as we have heard. Here in Bled, we shall have a consultation tomorrow with China in the format of 16+2. Think tanks will get together, and they will talk about China and Central European space, economic and other cooperation. I've been to Japan earlier this year, and I have heard a lot about their need, and of course many people who are sitting in this room are familiar with the growing interest in Japan for cooperation in Central European space. So we have to be kind of sensitive of this tendency and see what our needs are. And here I would like to come back to the question of how do we get from this 75% of GDP per capita to 100%. I think much of the answer really lies in the quality of cooperation between Central European actors and actors elsewhere. How do we manage this with China, for example? Is this going to help to develop high-end production, increase competitiveness, improve our infrastructure in a sense which would make our countries richer and more to the European level, or general European level? I think a large part of the answer lies in how well we manage that cooperation, and that is, of course, not only the task for Visegrad countries, this is not only the task for European Union, but it is something that has to be given thought to by everybody in Central Europe.
Mr. President, just a small question now. Karla mentioned that there is already quite concrete effort to create this fund, similar like Visegrad Fund, where individual countries are pooling resources together and are funding projects which are helping better communication among them. Do you see this as a feasible project? Can this work in the Balkan region, or there are some hurdles which may undermine this effort?
Well, this must be tried. You know, there are always hurdles. There are hurdles everywhere. There are hurdles in the Balkans, and they are known. But this should be tried. And I think nothing succeeds like success. We have to do things in a way which would produce a certain amount of success and proceed from there. So I would, of course, fully support the idea.
Excellent. Rainer, if just follow-up question on what I asked, Mr. President, do you see, I mean, from the point of view of Western Balkan countries which are not yet members of EU and are aiming to, watching what's going on in Europe, having financial crises, this cohesion, all kinds of frictions within European Parliament and disunity growing when it comes to these external challenges from southern or eastern neighborhood, what kind of effort should we do vis-à-vis them, which would be convincing that EU enlargement is not dead, that they should still do their homework in transition and we will do our homework and convince them? What are the convincing arguments you would say if you would be in front of students in one of the capitals of Western Balkans?
Yeah, or politicians. There is an enlargement fatigue inside the European Union, no question about that. And the European Union, since the outbreak of the financial crisis in 2008, has mainly been inward-looking. And the Russian troops coming to Ukraine is kind of a wake-up call that you cannot be a larger Switzerland inward-looking in a globalized world. It will not help you. Because the others are not accepting this as a status or profiting from it. And the other hotspot where tentatively one would have to continue making peace is the Balkans. Now, the Balkans, or the space of former Yugoslavia plus Albania, is now already divided between the ins and the outs. And among the outs you have some pre-ins, because there is promise to Serbia, to Montenegro, and to Macedonia that they would be becoming members if they get it right. We have no real prospects for Bosnia so far because of the internal difficulties in this country. And it's very difficult to go to Bosnia and say, do your homework, because the the life jacket that had been handed over to Bosnia in Dayton has turned out to be a straitjacket. And the Bosnian, the two entities probably are not in a position to undo this by themselves. Now, whether EU membership is an incentive strong enough to overcome some of these problems is unclear, and it will be more difficult for a country like Serbia or Macedonia to get into the European Union than it was for Romania and Bulgaria, because the European Union, the majority view is that it was too early. For political reasons, it was good to have them, but for economic and governance reasons, it was too early. And the reform speed and the willingness to address certain problems, including corruption, in the view of most EU countries, has lost momentum after Romania and Bulgaria joined the European Union. And so there will be more caution vis-a-vis a country like Serbia or, say, Macedonia for totally different reasons. I'm just highlighting these two. And so what can be done? One should say the path is open, but this also raises the Turkey issue, because Turkey is also a candidate country, and Turkey is a candidate country that had this association agreement in 1964 and has been waiting for 50 years now to come to the European Union, whereas a country like Macedonia has only been waiting a couple of years, and Serbia it's rather a couple of months. So the question immediately that needs to be addressed, and that's not an easy one for Europe, is if you give a perspective to Montenegro, why not to Turkey? Both are candidate countries, and why is the other more important than the one more important than the other? For economic and geostrategic reasons, Turkey is a lot more important for Europe than Montenegro. But we tend to think now that the avenue to Europe is only open for the former Yugoslav countries, states, the successor states of former Yugoslavia, plus Albania, and not so much to Turkey. So I think there's a predicament in this that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, we will not be able to organize enough momentum in these countries themselves. Because if they think they are put on a Turkey track, there will not be enough momentum inside a country like Macedonia or Serbia to do reforms that are necessary, but painful at the same time.
Thank you, and we reached the point when I would like to open the floor for all of you. If you could just introduce yourself, your affiliation, and if you could make your statement. But if I may ask you, if this could be limited to 1-2 minutes, what you will be either saying or then posing question. And if possible, panel is quite large. Try to avoid asking questions that I won't answer of all 6 panelists, because we will not be reaching lunch as planned. Okay, please, sir, you, and then over there.
My name is Horváth. My father was born in Transylvania and came over to Budapest during the Second World War, and I was born in Budapest. It means that we are a lot of things common in our genes, so we are more or less one nation, if put it in brackets. So I represent here the Hungarian Foreign Trade Association, and we have a subsidiary unit called Central European Logistic Cluster, where Copper is member, Rail Cargo Austria is member, so we are pretty well regional people. And I came over from another room listening to the politics, but I represent business. And for us, the V4 is very important and interesting. We would be interested to see a V4 plus, because it would be more, for the business, more comfortable. And the message is from the business side that everything about connectivity. So if regions are connected, then for the business, for the consumption, for the consumers, everything can be organized more effective way. And the connectivity means, of course, supply chain and logistic and transportation. And for us, it's very important to hear something, let's say, from Slovakia, whether behind this political initiative, what kind of practical business strategies can be seen in the future. We know that in energy there already something have been arranged or done. We have heard that maybe transportation will be a second common issue. So this would be very important. Last year we organized the first roundtable of the Central Eastern European ports. So Dansk was there, the top management, then Koper, Rijeka and Constanza. And we started to discuss common policies. So this is what I am interested in.
Thank you very much. Over there we will collect about 3 questions and then panelists will please make your points. Please.
Thank you very much. Liviu Mureșan, Evoris Foundation, Romania. More or less friends of the Central European countries, may I quote. From geopolitical point of view, the Central European countries are in between the influence and the interests of Germany and of Russia. How you see our European Union in 2025 from this perspective? Second, President Türk, thank you very much introducing the Chinese factor in the discussion and the 16+1 event from tomorrow. Can we speak about China as a new European power like US and Russia? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And question over there. And
thank you very much. My name is Bojan Grabovšek. I'm here on behalf of the Slovenian Association for International Relations. Thank you to all the participants, panelists for the very interesting ideas put forward. Now to the question itself. The title of the discussion is Central Europe. We ended up by talking about Visegrad, more or less. But returning to Central Europe, I'm allowing myself to say that the central country in Europe and within the European Union is Germany, very much central, and very much connected with the rest of Central Europe, even linguistically, Mitteleuropa, Zentraleuropa, Zwischeneuropa, etc. Well, there are German expressions were saying Central Europe to avoid Mitteleuropa. Now, the question is, how do you see, for example, Mr. Alejandro Negrín, from the distance, Central Europe? Is Germany part of Central Europe? We know it very much Central Europe. And maybe an additional particular question to Mr. Rainer Münz. He's particularly the expert on economics and financial flows. Can we talk about the future of Central Europe without specifically mentioning Germany? I mean, all the trade statistics, investment statistics, etc., they point towards Germany concerning this region. Thank you very much.
thank you very much. So I will ask now to give answers by my panelists, and then we will continue with your questions, comments. So we had 3 speakers, economy dimension. Karla, probably if you could take that question, it was addressed, but any panelists, if you feel like Central European region is between Germany, Russia, what and how we envisage in 20 plus, and then 2 specific questions to Mr. Negri and Rainer Münz on this German aspect. Karla.
Thank you. Concerning the first question, I have a very positive answer, because the International Visegrad Fund has very specific and practical tools, programs, and I mentioned that probably 80 or approximately 80% is focusing on internal cohesion. However, our programs are open for organizations and entities worldwide, so you can apply as well. When networking of trust and creation of networking was mentioned, you can do it You can, of course, there are huge projects focusing on infrastructure and transport and energy. So we are not able to deal with it. However, you can organize roundtables, feasibility studies, and to involve your partners from Visegrad countries. So you can do it, and this possibility is open for you. We receive several initiatives and projects from all over the world, and not only from Europe, but also from Indonesia and China and other countries. So I will be more than happy to have a consultation with you, and I can explain you. But there is a possibility for you how to immediately start a cooperation with the countries of P4. And probably just to answer the question concerning Germany, I know that there must be a political dialogue. However, we have also some practical cooperation, and not only transfer of know-how and political issues, but I'm really happy that we started a very concrete cooperation in Western Balkans with the German Minister of Foreign Affairs. There is an excellent project of a Slovak organization, SFPA, National Convention of the European Union, and now we will start the Regional Convention of the European Union by involving Montenegro and Albania, and through roundtables and involving politicians, NGOs, civil society organizations, transfer our know-how from the transformation period.
Great. Mr. Negri and Rainer Münz, Germany as seen, and then I think if two ministers and Mr. President, you would probably comment this very interesting question also, this Central Europe between Germany, EU, Russia, probably also Eurasian Union as new element emerging, because recently in Minsk, Madam Ashton basically met with leadership of Eurasian Union, which is quite interesting move in foreign policy. So, is Germany part of Central Europe from Mexican point of view and then from Austrian point of view?
Well, let me tell you that that's why I was mentioning that when a group recognizes themselves as a region, it's easier for the others. That is my point, and I think this is one of the contributions of Visegrad group. For the others, it's easy to focus a region. I'd say that traditionally for us, Central Europe is basically the four countries, the Visegrad countries, plus Austria, plus Slovenia. Basically, is that we understand that as the region. Now, I'd like to say also that the Mexican traditional universe of relations in Europe is concentrated in Spain. That is the second foreign investment in Mexico. Holland, this is the third foreign investment in Mexico. In terms of trade, our partner, our first partner is Germany, precisely, that have a massive, huge investments in Mexico, and that we see is that there are many elements to build things, but we don't know the region, and I have to recognize in an open way this opportunity.
Very interesting. Rainer, how Germany fits into all of these spiritual Central European talk?
The historical notion of Central Europe was neither East nor West. So when the concept of Central Europe came into being, the idea was the West is capitalism, democracy, whatever, and the East is authoritarianism and orthodoxy, and in between is a group of countries that is neither capitalist and democratic nor orthodox. Yeah? This was the original idea of Central Europe, and in that sense today Germany is not part of it, because Germany was the first country to get itself to the West, was enforced upon the Allies, and had to do with the fact that the western part of Germany became member of NATO, became member of the European Union, almost from the beginning. In case of NATO, not exactly, but so we have that. This country became an integrated part of the West. And the rest became an integrated part of the orthodox authoritarian East. Yeah? So today, I think it's very clear that Germany is a big player in Central Europe because the Czech economy, the Austrian economy, the Slovak economy, the Hungarian economy, being small open economies, is largely dependent on what is going on the German market because there's such a huge exposure when it comes to imports and exports. When it comes to capital flows, Germany is not invested to the same extent in all Central and Southeastern European countries. There's countries where, for example, capital flows from Austria are more important than capital flows from Germany. So you see even small countries can have a huge investment position. And when it comes to policy coordination, I think Germany is not part of Visegrad or of Central Europe. Germany has become the ultimate backstop for the future of the European Union. It's a German taxpayer when we are talking about trust. Why are international investors giving money to the European stability mechanisms that are bailing out Greece and Portugal? It's not because they believe in Portugal or Greece, but they believe that ultimately the German taxpayer will bail it out if necessary. And so I think the Visegrad countries need to cooperate and then can come to Germany and say, we have something to offer. Let's do a bargain, or let's strike a deal, or there's a give and take, something like that. It makes no sense to integrate Germany into a Visegrad cooperation ahead of an EU summit to cut a deal. It's good to know the German position, but maybe the interests of Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and even Slovenia are different. And if you want to negotiate, it's important that you have your own position that you can leverage. And I think in that sense, historically, yes, the concept of Mitteleuropa was created in Germany, but today it makes no sense, I think, to bring the historical concept and the current one together. Just for comparison, you can say today it's different. No, Germany is not part of it.
Minister Navracsics, your take on this issue. I am glad that Germany was brought because this is bringing a little spice in our discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. Slightly I would disagree if I may trigger a short-term debate about it, because I fully agree that the origin of the notion is neither West nor East. But that kind of political connotation that neither capitalism nor authoritarian or totalitarianism was dominated exclusively on the turn of the 80s, 90s, during the democratic transitions. There was an intellectual movement to find a third way for Central Europe based on NGOs and Myslivectví and so other Hungarians and Slovak and Czech intellectuals. But originally, Central Europe, Germany was a part of Central Europe. Sándor Márai, the Hungarian writer, wrote the Confessions of Bourgeois or Citizen. I don't know the proper translation into English. It's his memoir he wrote during the interwar period. And when he had remembered crossing the German-Belgian frontier, he wrote that we entered Europe because Germany was a part of Central Europe. Belgium was a part of Europe. So at least for the Hungarians, Germany was a natural part of Europe, and Berlin was one of the capitals, centers, together with Vienna, of Central Europe. And I think that could be the future if we, under the Chatham House rules, because there is a growing economic and political interdependence between Germany and Russia. And that could be a crisis in the near future of the European Union, that the European Union could be split between a transatlantic or an Anglo-Saxon or French, Anglo-French, or I don't know how to name it, and a continental German, Russian cooperation. And it will be a dilemma in Germany how to answer to that challenge. There is a growing economic interdependence with Russia, the Russian market, the Russian workforce, the German investments in Russia, and so on and so forth. It's a huge pressure for Germany. And on the other hand, there is a political alliance with the United Kingdom, with the United States, with France. And the answer will decide our dilemma as well, because Central Europe is just in between, just like the German equivalent of the Central Europe. It's a Mitte, I hope. And probably in the future, we will be again in an in-between state. So I think it will be very interesting, and it will be very risky and very interesting period in 10 years or 15 years from now.
President Türk, how do you see this dilemma being in between?
Well, you know, the questions that were raised are all long-term questions. And of course, it's in a way relatively easier to speak about long-term options because they depend on short-term things, which of course will happen. And it will be only later that we will see exactly where we are heading. But certain things we do know, and I believe that it's very interesting to try to figure out which are the elements of a long-term vision of this space in all the aspects that were raised in various questions. Now, first on the question of future economic strategy, which was mentioned, the size of the space and so forth, I would say one of the key things to look at is the north-south communication, north-south corridor in energy, in infrastructure. I think that is where I think a lot of emphasis has to be placed. Nothing comes out very soon. This is not a short-term thing, but it has to be a strategic direction to be given a lot of attention, and of course much of the economic cooperation should be organized around this. And of course we, from the Slovenian perspective, we always see the port of Koper as a point of entry for the entire Central Europe. We are not seeing this as a kind of a Slovenian national further development in that direction. Secondly, on the question of partnership or otherwise between Germany and Russia, which is a separate question, I think that the future, long-term future, is in partnership, not in containment. I do not wish to go further into that. We are talking about long-term visions. We are not talking about problems which are currently defining these relationships. But in the long-term future, I think partnership is more likely and also certainly more productive than containment as a vision and strategy. And I'm very, very happy that in the last meeting in Minsk, the foreign policy chief of the European Union, Catherine Ashton, was there, that Commissioner Oettinger was there. I think that this is a right direction to go. Cooperation and partnership rather than containment. With regard to China, I think China as the future economy #1 in the world will inevitably be part of this space. The question is how good and how successful we in East Central Europe are in bringing the right kind of value out of this cooperation. They're likely to play a big role one way or another, and the opportunity has to be taken advantage of. And finally, on Germany as a separate subject, and I'm glad that this was raised because it is a very important subject for the future. I think Germany, of course, remains a big power in the middle. It has, I agree with everything which was said about the elements of definition of the German position right now. And of course, it's not a coherent, it is not a simple definition. It's a rather complex definition of a great power in the middle, which is, of course, the core of the power of the European Union. It is also has a history of being at the center. And the only thing one can say on this matter is, looking back in history, as a big power in the middle, Germany would need the leadership of Bismarckian qualities, and I hope it will have it.
Mr. Drulák, your take on this in-between issue.
Thank you. Germany is difficult to classify because historically it has been all over the place. And I don't mean just the 20th century history. I mean the history of, if you look at Cologne, Trier, Mainz, these cities were part of the Western Europe. Yeah. Then if you look at Munich, Dresden, it's Central Europe. Königsberg, it's the Eastern Europe. So it's very difficult to classify, and it's not actually. And I think today Germany does not need does not need a narrow geographical classification because it's very well recognized as Germany. Germany is Germany. So it's like with United States. USA is USA. You don't have to speculate whether it's North America or where it is. It's USA. So it's the same with Germany. But what is important is the political role of Germany in Central Europe in the last 25 years. And I think this political role is quite unambiguous. It is a role of trusted partner. And that's very important. And we see that this role, there is nothing which would actually tell us that this role will not continue. It will continue. With Russia, it's more difficult because there was a serious attempt at partnership. We tried to develop a partnership, and that's why actually we developed also quite a high degree of economic dependency on Russia. Not only that we inherited some economic dependence from the old days, but we were actually quite keen on developing economic ties, new economic ties, which went beyond the Cold War legacy, because we believe that Russia can be partner. We were always a bit wary with the trust, to what extent can we trust, but the trust was actually big enough or strong enough to develop economic ties. Now we see that this is really a problem and that it can turn against us. Russia of today is not partner, that's clear. It's rival. It's rival. But I also share the hope of the President Türk that at some point, we will be able to develop partnership with Russia again. But this is not the case with Russia of today. Cannot be partner with this mindset, with these policies, and with the kind of behavior which it shows against Ukraine.
Thanks. We will have time for 3 more questions because then all of us will continue discussing things over lunch. So question here, question there, and then over there. With these 3, we are closing. But please, as short as possible, introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, distinguished guests, like at this point of the forum, one can say that now we are talking, and that's thanks to you. I'm the Finnish ambassador, Pekka Metso, here in Slovenia. And first of all, a little bit, nowadays one has to be very careful with geographic, so not Scandinavia, but Nordic countries cooperation has grown up and has a new calling again. I have seen it really clearly during the past 3-4 years that there's more voices raised for even tighter Nordic cooperation. And in this spirit, I would like to congratulate Visegrad, because I was stationed in Poland late 90s. I think nowadays one could write much more interesting reports about Visegrad cooperation than years back then. So you have made also tremendous steps forward in your cooperation. I also kind of like feel that we are here like a little bit in a situation that now I would like to come to Slovenia because we have distinguished former president here in present. What I have witnessed here during the past 2 years is that there's more and more talk about Visegrad also here in Slovenia. And somehow I have also gathered from the discussions here that quite often is said, as President also rightly mentioned, different directions of where Slovenia has been looking into. And of course, I have been puzzling, like, but what is the strongest draw? Like, which geographical direction has the strongest draw? I really haven't really solved this puzzle, but one of these nights in my lonely hours in the office when the light of Nepotichnik was my only companion, I found some writings of my predecessors who had written something into the box. And I have my greatest friends, I can say that honestly, are here in Slovenia. But what she had written down like 8 years ago was something like, where are the friends? Where are the friends? And then she went really deep into identity of Slovenians. And now I would like, Mr. President, to reflect a little bit of these changes, because now I think there is a new direction? Are we talking about, I mean, looking more precisely on certain directions than before? But about these choices and how do you see this developing, and a little bit reflecting the Slovenian soul and identity? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Question over there to Milan Nič. Microphone, please. And then over there.
Thank you. Milan Nič, Director of Central European Policy Institute, the regional think tank based in Bratislava. I have two questions. One is related to this report, Central Europe Fit for the Future, of which I have a privilege of being a co-author. You can access it on our webpage if there are only a few copies here, cpolicy.org. One recommendation, a central recommendation that we put together, a reflection group consisting of mixture of government officials, state secretaries of V4 and people from business like Rainer Münz from Erste Bank. The central recommendation was to focus on regional interconnections in Central Europe. The narrative we have constructed is that in the last 10 years, our countries were more focused on integrating into the EU, so looking more to the West. And we have neglected our region in such a way that now it's easier for me to drive by car from Bratislava to Bled than from Bratislava to Warsaw. There is no highway between Budapest and Warsaw or between Vienna and Prague. So in a similar spirit or manner as Mr. Horvat, I would ask you how, whether you see a certain homework being done in our capitals, V4 capitals and Slovenia, given the fact that in the current budget, 7-year budget of the EU for cohesion policy, as much as 40% is earmarked for our region. 127 billion euros is earmarked for cohesion projects, also infrastructure projects in the region. I think it's a chance of a generation to create the region physically by infrastructure, by interconnections in energy, transport, and so on. And I'm wondering how far the governments are in creating task forces and so on, and beyond Visegrad. So that's question number one. How do you see that the region can really be tied together in the coming years? My question number two is, will be a controversial one.
Milan, if I may ask, is it too serious, question number two? Because
I think so. I think it's a white elephant in the room, and that's conflict with, in Ukraine and Russia.
Okay.
Thank you for Deputy Minister Drulák for making the correction about Russia not being a partner now. I wonder what the panelists think about the fact that there are now Russian tanks without insignia in Donbass, that we are seeing a conflict over Donbass, and we shouldn't ignore it in a similar way as it took some time when war in Bosnia was starting for the EU to wake up. So what do you think is the implications for Central Europe of the fact that Russia is now involved in the war in Ukraine, and President Putin is talking in phone call of President of Commission Barroso that he can take Kiev in 2 weeks. What does it mean for Central Europe? Thank you.
Very good. Last question over there.
Thank you to all of the distinguished panelists for very interesting interventions. My name is Vladimir Bartovic. I am director of Europeum, Institute for European Policy in Prague. I will have very brief, maybe provoking question at the end. Since the crisis in 2009 and in recent years, the mantra of all the leaders in Europe, not just in Central Europe, is competitiveness, how to become stronger, how to survive in today's world. One of the possible ways, and here I'm not going to quote, I'm going to paraphrase, was shown by Prime Minister Orbán, who said more or less that maybe the liberal democracy is not the best model if the country, in this case Hungary, would like to be more competitive, would like to survive in this world. I would like to ask the distinguished panelists if they think that also the other countries of Central Europe, also for them, other models of governance different from liberal democracy should be found, and maybe if they can coordinate their efforts in this respect and find a common model of new governance which would be more competitive, and basically that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. So, dear panelists, now we have few minutes to wrap it up, but very serious questions were asked in the end. So, I think that, Mr. President, if I may leave you at the end, since you are from host country, an ambassador asked really very interesting question for your reflection. So if you would be wrapping up basically all panel. So why don't we start with, because those questions were about connections, connectivity within Visegrad region, so then Russia threat and new governance model. So why don't we start with Minister Navracsics, if you could try to answer those three things, what we do to be more pragmatic and interdependent. I mean, this connectivity issue. Second, Russia threat, and since Viktor Orbán was mentioned with his idea of new governance structure, so if you could take these three things.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just briefly. Well, I think we are on the right path, making our countries interconnected. Infrastructure development and investments can be in good hands in the future. We have to concentrate on the north-south corridor, and we have to build this Szczecin-Trieste infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and we are deeply interested in Luka Koper. For Central Europe needs to have a port somewhere in the Mediterranean, in the nearby. I don't know what is the situation with other countries, but for the Hungarian economy, the biggest port is Rotterdam, which is not not in the neighborhood. I would say that the Hungarian goods and the Central European goods could be much cheaper if we can develop a port in the nearby, and that could be Luka Koper, for instance. But in practical way of thinking, I think we have to interconnect our brains as well. For instance, we are competing with each other in competitiveness and getting the investments in the region. There is a sharp competition between Slovakian and Hungarian actors in attracting foreign investments. But for instance, the Suzuki factory in Esztergom had a lot of employers from Slovakia, from southern Slovakia. So it can be the case that an investment in Slovakia or an investment in Hungary or an investment in the Czech Republic or in southern Poland can generate a more competitive situation in the job market of the neighboring country. And it could be a good result. So probably there were some plans earlier, a few years ago, to develop shared development plans of the Visegrad countries, targeting EU sources. Probably we can begin such kind of preparatory work to harmonize the national development plans of the Visegrad 4 countries, because there can be some touching points. Of course, there are some divergences. Never mind. We have to strengthen the touching points, and we can cooperate on that touching points. Russia? The second one was Russia. Yes, Russia is. Well, I think there is a consensus regarding the behavior of Russia among the V4 countries. No doubt that this is a serious political situation, and as the Foreign Affairs Council and as the European Council make decisions by consensus, that means that those conclusions were voted by the Czech, the Polish, the Slovak, and the Hungarian counterparts. That means that there is no division. There is a debate about the instrument on tools. If the economic sanctions are the most efficient instruments for halting Russia, and you know that there are severe losses in the Polish agricultural sector, according to the Eurostat, right after the 3 Baltic states and Poland, Hungary is the 4th most exposed country to the Russian embargo. I mean, the embargoes introduced by Russia. And there is a debate, but I think there is a freedom of speech, even for politicians. And of course, that inside the European Union, we can debate on the efficiency of the measures against Russia. The crucial point is the decision, the conclusion, and there is a consensus. And I think there will be a consensus in Newport on Thursday and Friday on the NATO summit as well, because the basic belief is that we have to maintain or reinstate the status quo in Ukraine, and we have to keep Ukraine a democratic, independent state which enjoys territorial integrity and safeguards the minority rights endorsed by the documents of the Council in Europe and UN and other. And the third one is my favorite question, and thank you very much. Yeah. There is a difference.
I was worried that you will be left without.
Yes. I have no doubt about it. I think it's important that behind every translation, there is a cultural context. And people in the room who speak Hungarian can endorse me that liberális demokrácia in Hungarian means different than liberal democracy in English. Because in English, we use liberal democracy as a synonym of representative democracy, as a constitutional democracy, while in Hungarian, liberal democracy means democracy based on the principles of the contemporary liberalism. And if you see the whole speech of Viktor Orbán, he was talking about the selfishness and the atomization of the society. And he was talking about that we had the experience in the past 25 years that privatization often meant for Hungarians loss of markets, withdrawal of money, withdrawal of cash. For instance, in the 2008 bank crisis, the result of that bank crisis in Hungary was that the owners of the Hungarian banks, almost exclusively Western mother banks, withdrew their money and dried up the Hungarian financial market. And that is our experiences of the so-called liberal democracy. And he referred to the public wealth as contradictory to the so-called liberal democracy. Public wealth, I would say, that which is endorsed in Christian democracy as the main purpose of the activity or functioning of the political system. That means that, I'm sorry, just one sentence, that he would concentrate on a more communitarian way of making politics. And I think it's not contradictory, for instance, with the classical liberalism. It's not contradictory with the way of thinking of the American or the British democracy. But it is contradictory with the post-communist Eastern European democracies, and that's what he referred to.
Excellent. So good hint for you in your institute to start to do dictionary of political science and to explain things, what it means. Okay, Mr. Drulák, if you would be so kind, take a couple minutes answering some of these questions.
Just very briefly, because I mean the question about Russia and the question about infrastructures are actually linked. So what should be the strategic response to the Russian conduct? And it's quite clear that we should reduce our vulnerabilities, and the most important vulnerabilities for us are now in economic areas. It does not mean cutting economic ties, but developing only the economic ties which can be easily cut without a big damage to the economy. And that's linked actually with oil and gas, because this is one of the actually most important areas of dependence of Central Europe on Russia. Because as long if we actually do our homeworks and if we also realize our plans and are really able to interconnect our infrastructures in the energy area, then we will be much less vulnerable in this respect. So we can easily buy Russian oil and gas, but if we are connected to these wider networks, then we are also able to be flexible, saying, well, if deliveries from Russia are cut, then we can turn to other suppliers. So this is really essential, this interconnection, because this interconnection is also a strategic matter.
Excellent. If you want 3 panel, you do not need to. Mr. President, Spirit of Slovenia concludes this panel, Ambassador of Finland. And by now also we will not use any more Scandinavian, we should use this Nordic. I think that into vocabulary, which European will do, we need to take note of this.
Well, all right, you asked me only to respond to the question of Ambassador of Finland, and I would like to say that he's not alone in his evening hours when he's sitting in his office only in the company of Nebotichnik. You see, I often sit alone in my study, not even having the pleasure of viewing the lights of Nebotichnik, and think about the same question, which are the priority directions for us. And of course, ideally, a policy maker would look for a balance between different identities, between different directions. Of course, knowing that, for example, for Slovenia, the development with the Balkan countries has been the most dynamic in the past decades, and of course we have come the furthest in that regard. We are developing our communication, relations and policy with Central Europe, obviously that's on the second place. And then we have a slightly less developed direction towards the Mediterranean. But that, of course, is only a kind of a progress report. This is not our ultimate objective. We have to work in all directions, but it's not yet entirely defined with what kind of dynamism and what kind of priority. So I believe that this will take a while before things mature and before we really know the answer. But in the meantime, Mr. Ambassador, I would be very happy to sit with you over a dinner, reflect together. Maybe we shall be less lonely on such an occasion and discuss these things in some more detail. I know that this is not a detailed answer, but we can come to a more detailed answer when we have proper time for that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, and with this we came to conclusion. I would like to thank very much these 6 distinguished panelists who I think did excellent job. I think questions from the audience stimulated their creativity even more since we digged a little bit deeper. Thank you very much and bon appétit.